Today we're speaking with the former Prime Minister of Canada, Paul Martin, about the significant role he played in bringing marriage equality to Canada in 2005, making it the fourth country in the world and the first outside of Europe to legalize same-sex marriage nationwide. So what inspired Bill C-38? Why was it important to you? Why did you feel it was time was right for Canada to bring it?
Well, there are probably a multitude of reasons, but there are two that really stick out. The first arises out of a story. I had not given it much thought. In fact, along with most members of Parliament, not that many years earlier, we had voted for the conditional definition in the House. It was not a vote against gay marriage. It was simply a vote we had brought up to believe in traditional marriage in that way, and there was a vote for a House of Commons, and so we voted for it. And there were very few members who led on gay marriage at that time. But one day, I was talking to a close friend of mine, and the subject came up. And he said, "What do you think about it?" And I said, "Quite honest, I haven't really thought very much about it." And he said, "I want to tell you a story. You know my daughter?" And I said, "Yes." And I'd known his daughter since she'd been a little girl. And she said she was a tremendous daughter, little girl. But when she turned 12, something happened, and she started having problems. And when she was 13, they got a bit worse. 14 and everything else. And she didn't know what the problem was. Her daughter didn't know what the problem was, and the parents certainly didn't. And then when she was about 16 or 17, she met another girl. And then she knew what the problem was. And her parents stood behind her, supported her. She now has her PhD. She's teaching out on the West Coast with her partner. And she's very happy. And he said, "I could never deny my daughter that happiness." And to be quite honest, I thought to myself, I could never deny his daughter that happiness. And that had a huge influence on me. The second reason has to do with the Charter. This was a Charter question. I believe very strongly in the Charter. And so that if I had any doubts, which I didn't, the fact that it was a Charter question, that the courts had decided that way, made it very clear to me. And when people would raise the issue, why don't you have a referendum on this and let the majority vote? Right. To which my answer was, the whole purpose of the Charter is to protect minorities. And so it was, from my point of view, it was very clear what we should do.
It was clear to you. There was some backlash, or was there some backlash? It seems like there were some people that maybe opposed it and wasn't as clear to some others. Did you experience much of that?
Oh, sure there was. Partially it was a generational issue as well. But yes, there were certainly members of my party who were against it. There were two who left the party over the issue, cabinet minister who resigned. I spent a lot of time with my colleagues, individual members of Parliament, all through that process, talking to them about it. And to be quite honest, pretty well everybody who hadn't thought about it or started to think about it came on side. Mm-hmm. But sure, was there backlash? Yes, there was.
Do you think if it came out today, would it be different?
Well, anything doubt about it. Again, it's partially that's because it was a generational issue. And I think Canadians are actually quite proud that we led on the issue.
In terms of challenges, I mean, was that the challenge, just actually getting everyone on board, or any other challenge that you faced in trying to pass it and push it through?
Well, there were other challenges. There's no doubt that in a parliamentary system, as a prime minister, having your cabinet colleagues and your parliamentary colleagues from your party and from other parties come on side and making sure that you won the vote, that is always a challenge and an issue that is controversial, such as this. And within the public, there was some debate. I'm a practicing Catholic, and so it was very interesting. I mean, I remember going to church in Niagara-on-the-Lake, and the priest didn't know I was in there, and he gave a bit of a sermon. He gave a very good sermon on it. It wasn't fire and brimstone. He basically dealt with the issues, but it was clear where he was. And when I met him after church, I think he was quite surprised, but he handled himself very, very well. In my own riding, it's an interesting thing. After the thing was announced, one of the priests in the riding, one of the churches, said that, for instance, he would not give me communion. But another priest, who was a very good friend of mine, was asked about it, and he said, I don't understand why anybody should be against love. It was probably the best answer I've ever heard, and it came from a Catholic priest.
There you go. What about anything you would do differently? I mean, if you had the chance, let's say, to do it again, because there was a lot of, I don't know, with the backlash, with the challenges, would you do it, or would you still go straight exactly how you did?
Yeah, I think I would have handled it pretty well as I did. The issue was raised before I became Prime Minister, and there were some of my colleagues who led on it before I did, and I think I'm very proud of Sheila Copps, for instance, was outspoken on it, and she was right.
And I mean, you mentioned, I just want to go back for a step, you mentioned that personal story and how that sort of helped you make that decision for yourself. Was there any kind of reservations, though, in terms of, because like you said, you're Catholic, and it could, obviously you knew you were going to be facing a lot of people who may not agree with you?
The debate really came down to having civil union, and why wasn't a civil union acceptable? And the whole then. And there really was virtually very little opposition to that.
Right.
So the debate really came over replacing the word union with marriage. And so the discussion was, well, what is the traditional view of marriage? And the importance of the story that I told you was when I suddenly realized, in terms of what she felt, this young girl felt, and her acceptance, and her looking for acceptance by society over what she felt was a very wonderful thing. And once you understood that, then there was no difficulty. But you had to go through that. I mean, if you had a very cold academic debate, civil union versus civil marriage, without thinking about the human characteristics of that debate, well, maybe you would have stayed with civil union. But as soon as you began to realize, listen, this is something real, this is people's acceptance, this is the way people look upon themselves, and this is the way other people look upon them, then under those circumstances, to be quite honest, certainly in my mind, there was no debate.
And how do you feel today? You looking back on those days, looking back on decisions made and the steps you took, and the impact you probably did have by putting that through. What makes you most proud?
Well, I'm most proud that we did it. And to be quite honest, I think that I've talked to priests. I've talked to a lot of people who 4, 5, 6 years ago were against it, or not long longer actually, or against it. And everybody pretty well has
Yeah.
has made the trek. But you know, it was the usual thing. I talked to my own kids about it, and there was just no debate in their minds. You know.
I did want to just touch upon what can maybe bring this, the Conventional Marriage Act that you talked about, that it came and then the steps forward were not necessarily all linear forward, like steps forward, some steps backwards. Do you want to talk a little bit about Conventional Marriage Act and what happened?
Well, what happened was, apart from certain members of Parliament who had given the whole question a lot of thought, there wasn't much of a debate at that time. This wasn't an either-or situation. This is the Traditional Marriage Act, you know, where you're voting in favor of the air you breathe or something. And it wasn't until I guess maybe because the courts started dealing with it.
Right.
In my case, perhaps a little earlier, because I had this conversation with my friend. But as soon as I, at least, began to realize how important it was to those who were concerned that gay marriage be gay marriage, as I said to you, there was no change. That realization did not exist at the time of the vote in the House of Commons, the first vote in the House of Commons.